And books. Bring your children books that talk about these issues. They're not going to read UN reports, of course, but they can't. But they might read a book that actually talks about it. And also live it with your own families, with your own sisters, with your own, with your own wives. I mean, live this vision. I often say, that at home, and thank you, my brother. I often say at home that, when children are raised, and it's often they're raised that way, that men are the head of the family. They're told, man is the head of the family. The man is. What burden it is for these little boys to think that when they grow up, they actually have to head this family. And so it's a burden to boys just as it's an injustice to girls. And I say that show me a family where any one person leads and the other follows that's happy. Happy families are where there's co-partnership, there's co-leadership, there's mutual respect. Because I don't want to lead anybody, but I don't want to follow anybody either. I just want to be a partner. I want to acknowledge my partner's strengths and for them to acknowledge mine and acknowledge my weaknesses. I have many, and as well as acknowledge his. And therefore, when you raise boys and girls to think, I feel sorry for these boys because they cannot do it. Because headship is about leading, giving your children leadership in terms of spirituality, about finance, about everything. Nobody can do that. You need a partner to be able to lead a family. And so it's those kind of lessons, I think, for children that we need. Thank you.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Hi. Thanks to this college and a fabulous class that I'm in, a philosophy class that's taught by Kate Winninger. It has to do with Africa and human rights and immigration and all. And right now we happen to be studying about CIDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Mm-hmm. You can see why they call it CIDAW.
Yes.
But anyways, and I heard you speak of it. And just today I was doing some research and realized that President Obama would love to see it ratified. There's only just a few countries that have not gone along with this wonderful, I guess you could call it a treaty? Whatever.
Treaty, yeah, it is a treaty.
Yeah, a treaty. And so President Obama states that he would, ratify it right now if he could, but the Senate, our Senate, is not going along with it. So I'm curious how you feel about us being a part of it and what we could do to encourage these senators to straighten up and go along with it. So, yeah, that's my question, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, Botswana is in many ways similar to the US, is that in the sense that, it's ratified CIDAW, but that it ratifies anything very slowly. And one of the reasons is that we live in a very litigious, society, and therefore, I'm not too sure about the process in the United States, but if you ratify a convention at home, it becomes law, and therefore, people can actually sue on basis of that. And often, the attitude of our government is to say that we're not going to create, any, box of rights that we cannot deliver. And therefore, they try to deliver first and then ratify. So it's, I don't know what the reasoning is in the United States, but I suspect the same thing. And often they will say, but those rights are already in our Constitution or they're already in other laws. And that, but I think it's scandalous, that democracies will, refuse to ratify something that is so just obviously important as CIDAW. And it's it makes it very hard for because a lot of countries take leadership from the United States, so it becomes an excuse, But in my country, they say, "But look, Sudan ratified it, and they're not doing anything about it." So what does it mean to ratify anyway? So they play these games, But it is important to keep on, I think, pushing, or at least isolating parts of CIDO that you believe you could actually pass as individual legislation in your own country if you cannot have the whole convention ratified. Because one of the big pieces of CIDO, of course, is, for example, it recognizes quotas or temporary measures, and many countries are resistant to that. And also the implication is going to be, passing, I guess, other laws that make sure that CIDO is implemented. So it's politics.
You're saying do it a little bit at a time. If you can't get the whole thing, get a little bit. Each country should take incrementals.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you a joke about lawyers that I heard in Kenya when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. The guy, he's from the Ministry of Cooperatives, like my opposite number, and he lived next door to me, and I don't know what I was doing, but we hung out and pretended we were developing the country in 1977. You can see my hands here, I'm really working at this.
Yeah.
So he says, what is a trial? He says, a trial is where two lawyers get up in front of the judge and tell lies, and then the judge has to decide who is the better liar?
Okay. Okay.
Dumelam.
Sue Tartan, I have to say this before you start, was a Peace Corps volunteer in Botswana 1,000 years ago. And actually, she was instrumental, in putting together a group of students, or first of all, selling the idea to her professor when she was at UC, University of Cincinnati, the law school, the Urban Morgan Institute of Human Rights. She actually supports me in my case. And they worked tirelessly to make sure that I had the resources, the cases, it was, thank you, Sue, for being here today. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted, very often we think about, as in America or in the West, we often think that, we are from a superior society and that we should all be building our societies based on a Western model. And I just want to reiterate how important the experience was for me to have lived and worked in Botswana and to have been in the Peace Corps. And one of the reasons I got up here was to talk about how important, especially for people in this room, both younger and older, who are looking for change in their lives and who want to experience what it's like to live in another country and in another society. That Peace Corps it absolutely changed my life. Not only did it change my life, I was a working class kid from Natick, Massachusetts. My father was an Irish Catholic guy from Boston. My mom was a French woman who grew up in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, among the French community, and worked in a factory. And one day, at the age of 26, I get on a plane and I go to Botswana. And my whole world changes. And it changed for the better. And my experience has been, and I've now spent 28 years living and working in Africa, my experience has been that I learned more from Botswana, from people in Africa. I also worked in Kosovo, from the people that I served than I could have ever given. And I think it's very, very important to acknowledge that. I also wanted to say that I'm leaving on Sunday to work for UNDP in Somalia. So, iskawaran. Mahadsanit.
Okay. Maybe just to comment, Sue, as a follow-up to Sue's comment, that when we talk about culture, that for some reason, maybe some important reason, there is actually a resurgence, of, cultural identity issues in Africa, that there is a reclaiming of that space. I think what has happened over the years is that for many years, our education, was telling us exactly that the West is better, the Western model of doing things is better, and the Western food is better, their music is better, everything. But when people have 3 meals a day, as happens maybe in my country, when people have more time to think, they become to think, and they start to question the truths that they thought were just obvious. And as we're seeing a greater resistance to adopting Western cultures, I think, and therefore makes it harder even to deal with the harmful practices of culture, because people are beginning to actually proud in their culture. People are restudying ceremonies that have not been happened in many, many years. So we're coming to a point when there's a need for change for the better, but there's also a reclaiming of culture and a resistance to change. So I think it's an interesting time in Africa right now. Thanks.
Hi. I want to thank both Kathy and Peter for bringing you, because you're a real gift, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. As I listened to you yesterday and part of today in your introduction, I wonder at how you sustain your motivation and your drive to make the change. I think some of the court cases took years. Yeah. So as a person who sees herself as an agent of change, it's just amazing to see and experience the things that you've done. So how do you sustain the momentum? How do you sustain your drive in the face of the level of resistance I know that you've experienced?
Mm-hmm. I mean, also talking about the case, for example, the Sun case, is that actually physically collapsed when I was doing that, writing that decision. It was a hot, hot day, and it just seemed like all this amount of, material to read through. And I think if my husband had not been there, things may have not turned out so greatly. Actually, physically, I was so mentally, physically exhausted, that I actually, literally thought I was going to have a heart attack. I didn't. But why? I mean, I just really think that I'm a very lucky person. In the family that I have, the country I was born in, the children that I have, I just always feel that I just am lucky to have, the resources that I have around me, and usually it's in people. I have my parents both, are still living, and many people my age cannot say that, and my dad is a fantastic, fantastic supporter. And, when I had my children, for example, my oldest, Natasha, Chesha, I actually had her while I was still in school. And then my second, Tumisang, was the child from hell. He was born crying. He did not stop for 2 years. Now he's quiet and she talks too much. She was gone. But again, family. My brother came and stayed with us because we had to sleep in shifts. I'm not kidding. Because that child was just really unhappy about being born, and he stayed that way for 2 years. But without him, my brother, a young professional himself, we couldn't have made it. So it's family, it's people around you, it's a supportive environment, and it's just luck. Thank you.
Hi, so you say it once and once again, education, education, education. And so my question is, in developing countries and even here as well, how do we tell women and girls that education is going to be valuable for them when culture and their grandmothers, as you say, may be telling them that marriage and family are important? How do we get them to stay in school so that they can really achieve their dreams or even realize dreams that they never knew they would have? Okay,
a great question. And I think it's important to make schools attractive. And one of the ways, a very, very simple way that's happened in many countries, is offer children food in school. Good food. Because the parents will want to send that child to school because they can have at least one good meal, and the child wants to go. And I think it's really shown that that in itself is a major motivator in getting children to stay in school, and for parents who agree for kids to go to school. And once they're in there, they cannot help. When they can, when they see the potential of what education can do. When they begin to ask these questions, they begin to question the truth of their grandmothers. They, balance that what they learn at school. The next thing is just obvious. I'm valuable as an individual. I'm worthy of dignity, and therefore, if it hurts, it cannot be good for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. I think my question speaks specifically to immigrants who are educated in the United States and who have the dream of going back home to Africa to sort of make a positive change. One thing I've realized in my trips back home is running of the risks of being too American or facing the resistance of culture clashes. So my question is, what are some organizations back home in Africa or any of the African developing countries that foster this idea of immigrants being educated here and going back home to sort of help without running the risks of becoming too foreign? And also, how do you make that change possible? Because yes, you have received all this education, but sometimes starting from the small process leads to something bigger. So in your experience, how would you advise people to do that?
Okay. That's a tough question because, often when you live away from home for so long, you also lose the language, and language is a great way, to actually get embraced, that it gives you, so when you are Ugandan or you are in Botswana, you've lived in the United States and you cannot speak Setswana, it becomes very hard for you. But on the other hand, very soon, what does this to American mean? We can actually speak exactly like that, having studied in Botswana now. That's how international, communities are. So when maybe 10 years ago it'd be just obvious that you've been living abroad. Now nothing is obvious anymore, So, but I guess try harder or know that that's going to happen. Just know that it's going to happen, and therefore, Sue, it's very white. Didn't speak the language when she started. She speaks Setswana. She spoke Setswana when she left Botswana, for example. And I think many people would see her more as African than anything else, because of the way she interacts with people, because of the way she carries herself, just because of the way she's comfortable in that space. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I'm really glad I made it tonight because I teach middle school and my energy levels are like, so.
You and I both.
But I'm glad I came. I teach middle school in Lewiston, and the racial tension in that city is remarkably overwhelming, even with the students. They bring all the prejudices that their parents might have to school with them nearly every day. Part of your message that struck me was when you had mentioned that we can't let culture be a barrier to getting people the justice that they deserve. And one of the things that I sometimes worry about is there are people who would take that part of your message and use it for other means. Those who might hold some animosity towards the immigrant populations may take that part of the message and say, oh, that means we can force our culture upon you. Is there a way that you can think of that we could impart that same message, but make it more difficult for those that might want to manipulate that part of the message to do so, but still get them to think about ways in which they can help give justice to those that need it?
How do you give that same message in a way that is, used for the positive and not for the negative? Is basically what you're saying. And personally, I really strongly believe that if it hurts, it doesn't matter what you call it. It should not be happening. If he's beating her, to say that culture is not an excuse. And I'll give you a very simple example. People will say, that in an Indian situation, the reason why, she's considered less valuable as a wife is because she actually paid, what is it called? Dowry, you know. So she brings dowry to the table because she's not worthy. And therefore, dowry somehow gives the right to the husband to abuse her, you know. And women are considered to be, you know, it's a shame you have a girl because she's going to be so expensive to you in the future. Because with a girl, you have to give dowry. But in Africa, it's the opposite. Why don't we say